Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the PIDE webinar. My name is Nadeem Haque. Today we're going to discuss a very important new book that's come out, Womanplaining by Rehman, who is a senator in the parliament, as you all know, very famous personality. Sherry has written this lovely book called Womanplaining, and reading it, really enjoyed it. It's a great narrative. I think a great record of more or less the women's history in Pakistan, as well as several areas that have been documented. I think it's a complete, not complete, I should say, nothing can be complete, but it's a very, very comprehensive review with some of the best women writers of our generation, or even the earlier, or even the current younger generation. Some very good people have written in this book and covered a number of topics, from activism to the parliament to the judicial system to a number of different areas. But I'm told we don't have much time. So I won't stand between you and Sherry Rehman. Sherry Rehman is a much better speaker than I am, and she will explain it herself. I'm told Sherry has to rush off. So Sherry, over to you. Please explain to us womenplaining. We would love to get out of the man's world and hear from you and tell us about women in Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haque. I hope you can hear me well, and I don't have to rush off, but we have a 35-minute gap today, to 40 if you like. There is another one that's scheduled. So without much ado, you're asking me what womanplaining is about. Very tempted by your coffee, so I'm also going to help myself. It's really an attempt to link several generations of women's activism, the challenges we faced before and another generation did too, and what you see as post-millennial activism and feminism emerging in Pakistan. It's actually quite a surge of interrogations into the challenges that women face, and we in Pakistan, and you hear about regular incidents of violence, you hear about many things, and that troubles a lot of people. We hear, which it should. Yet I think it's important to look at structural issues that underpin the daily reality, the set of very limited choices that women face and are unable even to make in the limits placed on opportunities. So I think it's an important attempt, and it's not really my book, it's a collective effort by 22 authors in 21 essays. I did, of course, guide them along different paths and said, well, you know, one person has to write on a specific theme, with the exception of 3 and 4, who are what I call frontline heroes of the older, identifiable women's movement of the 1980s. And this has actually set the tone, in my mind, for what is a woman's movement. And then we ask questions, create intergenerational bridges between, I think, the types of different challenges emerging and the responses that women are giving them in terms of activism that is episodic or sustainable. So I think these, how they engage with the political arena, how they engage with government, how they engage with society at large, and what are the goals to overturn them. And the word womanplaining is not meant to offend. It is meant to actually be a not just a response to mansplaining, not at all. It is about an attempt for about women to tell their own stories in their own voices. And we did this at the Jinnah Institute because honestly, I felt it was important. After I met a young woman journalist say to me at a seminar that, oh, why are there were serious gaps in history and knowledge of women's activism, what laws have passed, what laws have not, where we need to go from here. So she said, well, isn't this your responsibility to give us a repository of really what our history has been and where we need to go from here? And I said, you're quite, this was Asma Shirazi, actually, a well-known journalist. And I said, you're quite right. That set a germ in motion in my mind. And the minute I got a chance during the first wave of COVID, where we were all in lockdown for 4 to 6 weeks, I started unrolling this project and got in touch with all the women who I thought were important. And as I said, it's like an intellectual convening, if you like, in paper. And I also feel it's important to encourage long form writing and reading amongst our next generation. So this was really how it panned out, and it's actually done rather well. We've not been able to have a formal public opening, what we call book launch, but it's already on its second print run because people are actually very refreshingly interested. And now we're looking at its Urdu translation as well, because the response has been huge and very encouraging. So the good news is that people want to hear and engage and grapple with women's issues and challenges. And I think a lot of these are men. Two of the reviews have been Why Men Must Read, one by Abid Suleri and one by Hassan Akbar, who was actually an active collaborator with me on this book at the Jinnah Institute. So it's really been a story, a journey of learning for me as well. And I do, as I said, the 4 women heroes that have written in it have actually just told their own stories and how they focused on certain areas, you know, Hina Jilani, Zora Yusuf, Farida Shahid, Khabar Mumtaz. These women have actually been a defining part of a very dark time in Pakistan's history, when human rights was really not at the center of public discourse. And I think that women parliamentarians are actually crucial for bringing women into women's issues and human rights issues into the public domain. And we, you know, like Afia Sherbano, who's a acclaimed scholar on feminism and the patriarchy, discusses how we have not done enough work on even documenting labor and women in the, you know, the care economy or the labor economy. And she's absolutely quite right. There has not been enough engagement with women in labor and unionization. And then I did make I asked requested Zinia Shaukat to write about that, and it was quite a journey because many of us ended up educating each other. Obviously health and education, and Shanaz Wazir defined a bit of that. Then Rafia Zakria did the COVID intervention, and what how women were at the crosshairs of every fresh wave of crisis, particularly, you know, when within locked doors they encountered a new surge in domestic violence. And this is something that women were experiencing the world over. Nigar Dad and Shamaila shown a very, I think, compelling light on women's activism in the Me Too and digital world, its contradictions and challenges. And of course, Sharmeen Obaid, in her inimitable style, uh, tells stories from what I call postcards from the edge of pain, about where women are suffering and how they're actually still looking at in you know in different realities on the front lines of resistance, and also what they face. And some remarkable essays on also the legal system by Sarah Malkani, Maliha Zia, the new generation, and Sarah Bilal have also picked up from where our generation hasn't quite left off, but they are carrying on that legacy, because that fight never ceases. So while you have the same defining fights at the courts, at the legal systems, at the lawmaking, if you like, desks, then you also have activism like the Aurat March, with Rimal Moyuddin looks at. And I asked Zofine Ibrahim to bring her experience from, even if it's anecdotal, from the field of climate stress, and how, if Pakistan's the fifth most affected country by climate change, what is happening there. at the intersect between acute climate and weather, extreme weather changes, and women's experiences and their lives, especially in remote villages. You, Bina Shah and Fifi Harun have addressed different aspects of literature, and I mean, Bina Shah has written about writing as resistance and addressed it historically, while Fifi has looked at Pakistani soaps and how they stereotype women. It's in a quite a remarkable essay. So I would urge everyone to really have a look at this book, and in perhaps learn from it or contribute further questions to an ongoing work in progress, because women's lives are a constant work in progress and across the multidisciplinary spectrum. So I think I've spoken quite a bit. I don't know how you want to proceed, Dr. Haque. Do let me know and guide me. You seem a little tired. I'm sorry. Is it all right? Is everything okay?
No, it's okay. You please go ahead. I mean, no, we have no. I can ask you a few questions if you like. We can throw it open to the audience, whatever.
I don't know the format. If you,
Well, very quick question then. I just want to find out from you that you say somewhere that movements require clarity and unity to affect change. And then you make a distinction between the older generation and the younger generation in terms of their behavior and how they react to the movement, which obviously there should be because environments change, things change. But could you explain this a little bit? How you see the movement, for how it requires clarity, how the older generation, younger generation.
Older generation, very crucial question, which informs the heart of this book. As I said, it's an attempt to build intergenerational bridges, and the idea really was to seek coherence across the generations and not devalue anyone's experience, either my lot, the 60 somethings or 50 somethings, or the very vibrant, robust, and interclass sort of activism that's springing up. Farida Shaheed and others are loath to call it a movement. Aurat March is not a movement, but it is in the sense that it is not a movement like the earlier WAF movement was, with definable goals and constant coherent engagement across time. But I think that what the current women's activism is actually different in a more important way, because it is able to mobilize a large number. It does it episodically, but the mobilization is across the board, across the class spectrum also, which the WAF did too, but they were facing different challenges. And today's younger women, the post-millennials and millennials, are asking questions that we were too tangled up in the politics of the Zia era and of to roll back laws that were inimical to even citizenhood and state, women's identities. Today, women are negotiating many challenges, and I would suggest even bigger challenges than the ones we faced. We had a state to stand up to. It was fairly identifiable, black and white, what we saw. Now you have, of course, after 9/11 and various other milestones in our own strategic history, women are dealing with extremism and the politics of broader political violence in society, which, as you saw, was an extreme manifestation of that would be what happened at Army Public School and what happened to Malala Yousafzai. And of course, the bombing of girls' schools by violent extremist outfits, and the targeting of women across the board as challenges to political violence as we see it. So the spectrum of challenges has changed and actually amplified, because the older challenges remain. Many of the laws have been that we were fighting against have actually been thanks to Parliament and to constant engagement with women activists. We have been able to reverse or rather take the teeth out of, for instance, the Hudud ordinances. So you don't see posters of that, remove or repeal the Hudud ordinances, which was insane in that if a woman reported rape, Then she had to find 4 witnesses, or else she would be in police lockup very soon under the Zina and Hudud ordinances. And, that was in itself quite an outrage, that you could not report rape without 4 witnesses. Obviously, you can't get 4 witnesses. They were either colluding or they would have gone to the police. And so all these contradictions that produced a kind of collective legal and political schizophrenia about women was being addressed by our generation. And we engaged with political parties, we engaged with the state in our attempts to bring change, change the status of women. And so a forest of laws and amendments came up and changed the actual discourse of, I think, political life, literally, which women legislators brought to the surface. And that was informed mostly by the activism of the women's movement of the 1980s that sprang up in actual response, the biggest and the most important wave, as an identifiable movement with coherent goals across time that were consistently pursued. Today's activism, as I said, is much broader spectrum. It even aggressively deals with body politics and in things that we were not dealing with. And also, as I said, the kind of encroachments on a woman's rights and space that really we don't see, we were not at that time uh, put, up to a challenge. We were just picked up by the state and put into, police vans and sent off every time we fought. Um, which is of course a different and beaten up, and you've seen the famous pictures of the lathi charges that we all had to face. The Lahore ones are captured on camera. If today there was this happened, then all of it would be on a film archive or on people's citizens journalism, and people would know much more about what we faced. But it's not an attempt to valorize what we did, but rather to connect to the new feminists and not devalue their work, but to add value to it and say, well, what you're doing is equally important, and we would like to uh, connect with you. We would like to be able to bring our resources to the problems that you and all face. And yeah, the younger women do approach me when there's a problem, when they encountered the first time. In today's politics, there's a kind of a moving away, a recoil from formal politics or engaging with formal politics, if you like. And that had to change. And there was a sobering up when these women's activists faced obviously a backlash from the fundamentalists and the right wing. And of course, they're violent, and the girls and the women are non-violent. So they immediately had to, especially in Sindh, they came to us and said, of course, we'll be offering you complete protections. But my politics, for instance, has risen from the activism of the women's movement. That's how I linked into the People's Party. They would always come when called, when we needed critical mass. And there were, far and few, it would be the ANP in Karachi or the People's Party that would respond to our, calls, okay, please, we need critical mass. There's 50 of us standing at Regal Chalk, for instance, protesting, or Dande Barsare. So People's Party की बसें भर के आती थी, ANP के लोग आते थे. It was that kind of sort of a political umbilical that animated the movement in those days. We were constantly in touch with political parties. Some even became part of political parties, and we haven't rolled up the ladder behind us. So that's really where we want to go with this. And I think it's been a very important intellectual convening for us.
Senator Saiba, I would also be very remiss. I think हम दोनों बहुत एक चीज को याद करना जरूरी है इस मौके पे. You've dedicated your book to Benazir Bhutto. Obviously, it's important because she did something remarkable, that even before the US has a woman leader, she became a woman prime minister in Pakistan. So in that sense, Pakistan is among the leading countries in the world where a woman took the reins of power very early in the game. So of course she has to be remembered, and she should be saluted for that. The second person that I think is also very important to salute is Asma Jahangir, who also died very early, but she was a pioneer in this area. So उनको याद करते हुए मैं आपको एक और सवाल छोटा सा आपके सामने पेश करना चाहता हूँ। आपने अपने एस्से में लिखा है politics, and this is a very provocative and very important statement that you need to explain. Politics in Pakistan remains a tradecraft where women's rights are traded for bargains on seemingly unrelated concessions and often necessitate the creation of an illusory win for the other side. Saving face for men rooted in patriarchal politics is not just a daily staple of diplomacy, but also in negotiations on women's power in many pivotal discussions. ये तो आपने बड़ी एक किस्म की बहुत बड़ी statement दे दी, I should say, and it reflects deeply on the parliament. So please elaborate.
होता है जी, bargains are struck on women's rights all the time. Either they're considered rights light, politics light, कि अच्छा ये human, क्योंकि women's rights जुड़ी हुई होती हैं इंसानी हुकूक से and human rights से. और I'm glad you mentioned Asma because she is in my forward. I've mentioned first Benazir Bhutto and her contribution in my life specifically, as well as the defining arc of inspiration she held for women all over the world, not just Pakistan. I mean, as you know, Hillary Clinton has stood in line to see her. And Asma is another such, star that burned bright and left us before she could light up more spaces for us. But yes, the question you're asking is linked to the rights issue. Okay, if because for instance, every bill, every law, आप कुछ भी ले लें, इकोनॉमी का होगा, लेबर का होगा, किसी भी चीज का होगा, schools को रेगुलेट करने को, we come across hundreds of laws. Sometimes it's very onerous work actually. And उसमें I'm looking at it कि जी penalties हैं, ये हैं, वो. It's a forest of things that you come across. And in that, when you see that women are again in the crosshairs or there's no sensitivity, people are not gender sensitized, they don't understand how it will affect women, we can often make laws that that we are not sensitive to and end up being inimical to the problems women face, or the solutions rather. And in this statement, what I'm saying is, for instance, I'll give you an example. You're looking at, I didn't want to constantly talk about my own experience, but since that chapter is on women and politics, I recall I was babysitting the women's ministry for 3 months. It had to, it was part of my 4 or 5 ministries. My main ministry was another one. But I said, okay, if I have this for 3 months, let me use the time to do something tangible instead of spread thin, then nothing gets done. So I said, let's just use this time. We're in cabinet, we have goodwill. I, of course, turned immediately to my sisters in the women's activism movement. They all came to Islamabad. They met in my office, including other parliamentarians, to keep consensus, because this is very important. Jo aajkal nahi ho raha hai. It's very easy. It's actually not difficult in committees to build consensus. People want to work. They want to act, to go, create laws that are both enabling citizens and also to bring some value to their day, to what they do, to answer to the people. तो लोग तो बहुत ready थे, हर किस्म की parliamentarians हर पार्टी से आई थी. तो मैंने कहा जी अब sexual harassment law बहुत मुश्किल law है पास करना, इसको हम क्योंकि अभी cabinet है, majority है, बस momentum है. I usually write the manifesto for the People's Party, हिस्सा है हमारा, and it won't be turned down. So let's go for this. And we sat there, and Fawzia Saeed had brought her law. Isme masle the, jo, and it's a lesson we are using even today in many, like domestic workers law हमने कल देख रहे थे इस्लामाबाद में. मैंने कहा create an ombudsman between the courts and the organization. There has to be a facilitation. So women ombudsman was created by that law. इस तरह हम बना रहे थे, चलिए लंबा प्रोसेस हुआ, अच्छा काम हुआ. And I said we speed it through because I've got this ministry for 3. I literally babysitting it and I've got to ये कुछ करना है हमने. काबीना में ले गए. I found there that the secretary of the women's ministry decided, normally secretaries present the lawmaking and all. He decided to make a presentation against it, as did a couple of other secretaries. And I said, excuse me? मैंने कहा ये बंद करें लैपटॉप में प्रेजेंटेशन देती हूँ. और बहुत सारे मिनिस्टर्स नहीं होते, sort of hands on to do that. We do, our governments do rely on the bureaucracy. That's how it is. So I wouldn't. And I said, no, this we have politically driven this law. And I was, मैंने तो उसका अच्छा खासा सारे explain कर दिए chapter verse. I said, ये बिल्कुल गलत कह रहे हैं ना, इससे लेबर का ताल्लुक है, लेबर मिनिस्ट्री एक्साइटेड हो रही है, लॉ मिनिस्ट्री अब. I said, ये क्या हो रहा है mansplaining, बंद करेंगे. तो प्राइम मिनिस्टर यूसुफ रजा गिलानी, much credit to him, laughed, smiled and he said, जब मेरी सीनियर मिनिस्टर इतनी दलाइल दे रही हैं और वो समझती हैं ठीक है, तो we will in principle, अगर law object भी करा, we'll in principle pass this. And so that, then it can't be rolled back. He knows the politics of how these things happen. He said there was one other federal minister sitting there, woman, Samina Gurki. He said, क्यों madam, Ms. Gurki, ये ठीक है, आप क्योंकि woman है, मैं आपसे पूछती हूँ कि आपको शरी रहमान का बिल, उन्होंने जी का फौरन, शायद शहनाज वजीर अली was also sitting in as SAPM. मैंने कहा इनसे भी पूछ लें. और बाकी मेरे मेल कॉलीग्स, नहीं सर मैं उनसे नहीं पूछ रहा, आपका बहुत वजन है. I was a senior minister. It passed. Okay, so the men had, on the male secretaries had made a bargain कि ये हम वहाँ जाके ऐसा करेंगे. So ये हुआ. I then announced, because I was information minister and I had a big ministry, मैंने वहाँ cabinet briefing में announce कर दिया, no rollback possible. सदर जरारी का फोन है, well done शेरी. मैंने कहा अब ये नहीं रोल बैक कर सकते. All the forces who want to. And then that continued. It took a year and that continued. Then, because you're asking me, I won't really take names. इससे दिलचस्प आपके लिए bargain में बताऊं जो किसी ने हमसे करने की कोशिश की. When I was ambassador and I had come down to Pakistan, we were trying to open the G-locks and वो हम deal cut कर रहे थे कि, लेकिन हम किसी से deal नहीं cut करते without the parliament. The parliament has to decide on what deal has to be cut. कि फौजों का हम वहाँ असलाह का इनखला नहीं होने देंगे. It has to come out. It cannot go into Afghanistan. We said, okay, we'll do that. We'll open the NATO supply lines because now they have apologized for the 26 soldiers martyred in Salala. So it took 6 months, 8 months. So I was sitting with Parliament and President said, ये सब तुम्हारे colleagues हैं, तुम्हें तो as MNA uproot करके वहाँ भेजा था. And I said, okay. So one of our allies objected कि ये क्यों हो रहा है. तो उन्होंने कहा कि मैं आपके घर भेजता हूँ शरी रहमान और रज़ा रब्बानी को to explain the bill, but I said you have to pass it or I'm going back. ये explain all this. ये खोलना है तो खोले, नहीं तो नहीं खोलने. नहीं हमने खोलना है, बिल्कुल ठीक है. It's part of our arrangement with Afghanistan. That's what they want. Khair, sanity was prevailing except for one person. शाम को उनके घर गए परसुएट करने, तो उन्होंने कहा कि डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस बिल पे आप स्टेप डाउन करें मैडम. मैंने कहा मैं तो एमएनए नहीं हूँ, वो मेरा पुराना बिल है, वो तो आप कोई और बेबी सिट वो कर रहा है, पायलट कर रहा है. I believe it was a MNA of People's Party called Yasmin Rehman. I said, speak to the speaker, she's a woman, आप उनसे बात करें, ये मेरा इस पे बार्गेन नहीं हो सकता. I'm here in a national security context and I have no ability to. He said, कैसी बात करें, ये आपका बिल है, ये आपकी हुकूमत है, ये आपकी काबीना है, इस पे आप चेंज लाएं. मैंने कहा कौन सा चेंज? I think in a sexual harassment सब में के मर्दों पर भी वायलेंस ना हो. मैंने कहा ठीक है जी, आएंगे कि मर्दों पे वायलेंस नहीं होगा. And very quickly after that an announcement was made by him that as soon as we left के जी उन्होंने तो अग्री कर दिया है कि डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस बिल पे वो अपने शिकें वापस लेंगी, which was not at all the case and that didn't happen. To this day that domestic violence bill रुल रहा है, अभी भी रुल रहा है. You heard talk about it going back and forth. जी वो रुल रहा है. तो शुक्र है मैंने सेक्सुअल हरासमेंट वाला करा लिया था, but we had not agreed to any bargain and look at what the bargains people try to make.
What about the discussions in Parliament on women's issues? Are they deep? Do they happen, or are they just simply papered over?
No, they're actually quite substantive if you want to push them and if you have allies in the room. Very often, अब तो औरतों को बड़ा हौसला होता है. Women parliamentarians no longer hold back. अच्छा, एक दो लेवल ऑफ कोलैबोरेशंस होती हैं जी. एक तो बड़ी प्लेनरी में होती हैं, अक्सर और बेशतर बदतमीजियां तो होती हैं, हर किस्म के ऑफ कलर जोक्स किए जाते हैं, प्रोवोकेशंस करते हैं, औरतों के एक्सपीरियंस को डाउनग्रेड किया जाता है, पॉलिटिक्स लाइट बनाई जाती है कि नहीं दिस इज नॉट रियली. I've noticed that's changed. And when I particularly stand up, I have a front row seat. I used to be leader of opposition. I'm also parliamentary leader. तो मेरी आवाज़ शुक्र है अभी अल्लाह का कि सुनी जाती है. तो मैं जब तकरीर झाड़ देती हूँ किसी को तंबी करते हुए कि ये बिल्कुल गैर मुनासिब आप गुफ्तगू कर रहे हैं और आप या तो माफ़ी मांगे या आपको बड़े इसके असरात दूर रस होंगे आपके लिए एज ए लेजिस्लेटर. Very often, last time it was a government legislator, but all the women across the aisle, without lobbying, but it was off the cuff. उसी वक्त सब खड़ी हो गई मेरे साथ. और ज़ाहिर पीपल्स पार्टी तो वैसे ही खड़ी हो गई because we do this. ANPB तो प्रोग्रेसिव पार्टीज जो अपोजिशन की हैं वो तो वैसे ही खड़ी हो गई, मगर हुकूमत की भी बेंचेस एवरी टाइम नाउ कोई तज़हीक होती है, कोई इनमिकल लॉ होता है, जैसे चाइल्ड मैरिज रिस्ट्रेंट बिल था, अभी रोल रहा है नेशनल असेंबली में, लेकिन सेनेट में कैसे पास हुआ? द वुमेन ऑल जस्ट सेड व्हाट इज दिस. आई सेड ये चाइल्डहुड की एज 18 तक होनी चाहिए, आप उससे पहले लड़कियों की शादियां ना करें, वो जहनी तौर पर बाशऊर नहीं होती, दे आर नॉट रियली मैच्योर इनफ टू मेक डिसीजंस. एंड अदाद शुमार आपको क्या बताते हैं? वो बताते हैं कि अब औरतें अपनी हेल्थ चॉइसेस नहीं कर पाती, दैट हॉरेंडस स्टैटिस्टिक्स. तो सब लोग सुन के सहम जाते हैं जब एक्चुअल अदाद शुमार सुनाए जाएं, because statistics don't often lie, but they mask greater tragedies that we really have no recourse to, which Sharmeen Obaid and other and Rimal Mohyuddin's essays speak to. I wanted that. I said, आप लोग graphic experiences बताएं कि लोगों को ये समझ आए. And a lot of my male colleagues, not just in parliament but outside, were very sobered. Or when I said पढ़ो ये भाई जबरदस्ती पढ़ो तो अच्छा, it's very sobering. The woman's experience in the 21st century still is so shaped by violence and the limits on opportunity on a big spectrum. Okay, it's quite sobering. Ji.
Since you have to go in a hurry, can I take quick 2 or 3 questions?
Go ahead,
Ji,
yeah.
Jamal Shah Saab.
जी सर, मैं जी सर. जी सर, मेरा ताल्लुक उस यूनिवर्सिटी से, मैं स्टूडेंट एंथ्रोपोलॉजी से ताल्लुक रखता हूँ. मेरा सवाल मैम से पहले तो एक है कि जैसा कि मैम ने बात की या आपने भी बात की कि अस्मा जहांगीर एक बहुत बड़ी लीडर थी या बेनजीर साहब एक बहुत बड़ी लीडर थी. मैं एक चीज देखता हूँ जब भी मैं बुक्स पढ़ता हूँ अपने, तो एजुकेशन एक बेहतरीन टूल है जिससे हम अवेयरनेस ला सकते हैं. जो भी हमारे यहाँ की जेंडर स्टीरियोटाइपिंग होती है या इतने जेंडर प्रोग्रेसिव रोल्स हमारे यहाँ बुक्स में दिखाए नहीं जाते, और अभी तो एसएनसी पे बहुत बात हो रही है. मैं भी खुद रिसर्च भी अभी कर रहा हूँ एसएनसी और दीगर बुक्स पे मैं रिसर्च करता हूँ. सो मेरा सवाल मैडम से ये है कि हमारे यहाँ एजुकेशन में खसूसन टेक्स्ट बुक में औरतों को इतना मतलब प्रोग्रेसिव रोल्स में क्यों नहीं दिखाया जाता? अमूमन मैंने खुद अभी कुछ दिन पहले सिंध टेक्स्ट बुक बोर्ड के बुक्स को एनालाइज किया था, तो मैंने एक चीज नोट्स की कि कुछ ही फ्यू इतने पावरफुल एग्जांपल थे, जैसे कि बेनजीर साहिबा थी या मारिया तूर थी या मलाला यूसुफजई थी. इतने कोई खास मुझे पावरफुल जेंडर प्रोग्रेसिव थिंग्स नहीं दिखाई दी, क्योंकि मैडम का ताल्लुक पीपल्स पार्टी से. तो मैं मैम से यही सवाल करूंगा कि पीपल्स पार्टी सिंध में इस पर क्या काम कर रही है और हमारी हुकूमतें क्यों नहीं इस पे ध्यान दे रही?
गुड क्वेश्चन जी.
जी, अहम सवाल है. आई थिंक ये जरूर एड्रेस होना चाहिए. पहले तो आप आजकल देख रहे हैं सिंगल नेशनल करिकुलम के खिलाफ भी यही बात की जा रही है कि औरतों की उसमें स्टेरियोटाइपिंग बल्कि काफ़ी मनफी है, और उस पर हुकूमत ने कोई जवाब नहीं दिया है कि हम उसको तब्दील कर रहे हैं या ऐसा क्यों हुआ. मसलन जो गर्ल चाइल्ड है, और गर्ल चिल्ड्रन की वैसे भी बहुत बड़ी स्कूलिंग क्राइसिस है पाकिस्तान में अक्रॉस द बोर्ड. तो ये इस हवाले से तो ये बहुत अहम बात है, और स्टेरियोटाइपिंग बहुत होती भी है. सिंध टेक्स्ट बुक्स में एक तो हमने लास्ट टाइम आई वर्क एट द फेडरल लेवल, लेकिन बिकॉज ऑब्वियसली सिंध से जाहिर है मेरा ताल्लुक है, और मेरे वालिद भी वाइस चांसलर थे सिंध यूनिवर्सिटी के. तो मैंने कहा इनसे कि देखिए इसमें पहले तो इंक्लूजन और प्लूरलिज्म भी हमारे मंशूर का बहुत अहम हिस्सा है. कोई भी अकलियत हो, औरतें हों, इसमें हिस्सादार हों. सिटीजनशिप की हिस्सादारी पहली चीज़ होती है. तो इस ज़िम्रे में पहले तो कायद-ए-आज़म मोहम्मद अली जिन्ना की जो मशहूर तकरीर है अपनी असेंबली के साथ, جو اسمبلی لا میکنگ اسمبلی تھی, جو قانون بنا رہی تھی, جو آئین بنا رہی تھی, تو اس اسمبلی سے 11 اگست کا بہت مشہور ان کا ایک خطاب ہے جن میں انہوں نے کہا ہے کہ پاکستان کس طرح ہر فرق کے لیے, ہر مذہب کے لیے کوئی تفریق نہیں ہوگی, اور انہوں نے پاکستانی شہریت یعنی پاکستانی سٹیزن شپ کو بہت کلیئرلی ڈیفائن کیا تھا کہ سب کا حق ہوگا کھلی فضا میں اور پاکستان کے جھنڈے کے تلے ایکوالٹی میں, مساوی حقوق کے ذریعے رہنے. اس زاویے سے انہوں نے بات کی تھی. تو میں نے کہا یہ تقریر جو ہے ہمارے لیے بہت اہم ہے, اور اس کے بہت سارے ڈینائلسٹ بھی ہیں, اس کو بہت لوگ وہ بھی کرتے ہیں کہ نہیں ایسی بات نہیں, تو اس کو کیوریکولم میں ڈالا جائے, وہ بھی ڈلوایا گیا. اور اس کے بعد جہاں تک جینڈر اسٹیریوٹائپنگ ہے, آئی تھنک کیونکہ ہم بے نظیر شہید کی پارٹی ہیں, بالکل موضوع ہوگا کہ اور عورتوں کی اس ٹیکسٹ بکس میں باتیں ہوں, اور تھوڑا سا ان کے رول کا کردار ڈفرینشیٹ کیا جائے کہ صرف کچن میں نہ ہو عورت, اور صرف گھروں میں بند نہ ہو عورت, جس طرح سنگل نیشنل کریکولم میں بہت عجیب و غریب باتیں میں نے پڑھی تھیں, اور جب میں نے پوچھا تو ان کے بارے میں کوئی جواب نہیں آیا, اسی لیے سندھ نے وہ اڈاپٹ نہیں کیا. ون آف دا ریزنز واز دیٹ کہ جی اس میں کافی تھوڑا نہیں کافی کنٹروورسی تھی. اور دیکھیے پیچھے جانے کے بجائے ہمیں آگے جانا چاہیے, اپنا سب کو کام جاری رکھنا چاہیے, اپنی آواز اٹھانا, اپنے خدشات سامنے لانا. اور آپ نے بہت اچھا سوال کیا ہے, میں ضرور اس بات کو دیکھوں گی کہ کریکولم میں انکلوژن کی تو بات کی ہے ریلیجن, فیتھ اور جینڈر کے حوالے سے, بٹ رول ماڈلز بھی میں سمجھتی ہوں, اور ہیومن رائٹس کی ڈسکورس بھی اہم ہے.
Very good, ji. Shall we go to Jaswant Singh Saab? Jaswant Singh Saab.
جی السلام علیکم. پہلے تو سب سے پہلے میم سید رحمان صاحبہ کو کانگریچولیشن اور بیسٹ فار ہر بک. اور میرا سمپل کوشچن یہی تھا جو کو ایکسیڈنٹلی پہلے آ گیا ہے, کوشچن سیم ہی تھا. صرف یہ کوشچن ہے کہ میں کراچی بیس ایک لا اسٹوڈنٹ ہوں اور مجھے یہ بک چاہیے, تو کائنڈلی مجھے کنفرم کوئی ڈائریکشن بتا دی جائے گی کہ مجھے یہ بک کہاں سے ملے گا. پہلا کوشچن کو ایکسیڈنٹ مجھے سیم ہی آ گیا تھا, بس وہی پوچھنا تھا سلیبس کے لیے. تھینک یو.
بہت شکریہ جسونت صاحب. جی شریف
سنگھ صاحب یہ لبرٹی بکس ڈسٹریبیوٹ کر رہی ہے سندھ میں, اسلام آباد وغیرہ میں تو وین گارڈ, سعید بک بینک ہر اسٹور میں ہے, کیونکہ کراچی اور حیدرآباد اور بڑے شہروں میں زیادہ تر لبرٹی بکس ہے. ایئرپورٹ پہ دوسرے ہیں, کراچی ایئرپورٹ پہ بھی تو خیر دور کی بات ہے, لیکن یہاں کے بڑے بک سٹورز میں موجود ہے. امیزون پر بھی ہے, اور فولیو بکس جو پبلشر ہے پارٹنر ہمارا, ان کے ویب سائٹ سے بھی آپ پاکستانی روپے, میں نے اس کی پرائس انہوں نے مجھے جو کہا گیا تھا 3-4 ہزار میں نے نہیں رکھی, اس کو 1000 روپے سے کم میں رکھا ہے. تو آئی ہوپ اٹس افورڈیبل, اور ہم کوشش کر رہے ہیں لائبریریز وغیرہ میں بھی مہیا کرنا. تو جو لائبریریز ہم سے مانگ رہی ہیں ادھر ہم خود ہی بھیج رہے ہیں. میں 2-3 کاپیز بھیجنے کی کوشش کر رہی ہوں. جی
ہم نے شریفی بھی 5 کتابیں خرید کے اپنی لائبریری میں رکھ لی ہیں بیکاز اٹس این امپورٹنٹ بک. مہر زیدی صاحبہ. مہر زیدی.
جی السلام علیکم. I'm a doctor, medical doctor doing free medical services for poor women and children, and also I'm a social activist. Sherry Rehman, I really congratulate you for bringing out such an important book at this moment. My question to you is in the context of the recent, in fact, only today I've seen Maulana Aziz Saab's video on Twitter challenging the policemen to leave their jobs and being threatened by the Pakistani Taliban and to quit. How do you see this in aspect of reversing all the progress made on human rights in Pakistan, especially concerning women?
Again, very crucial question, Ms. Zaidi. I think these are very troubling images we see today for women, especially, and other vulnerable communities, everyone really. The writ of the state is totally non-negotiable. The ability to use force and violence whenever needed, which must be always very reduced, must lie with the state and non-state, not non-state actors. And as far as this is concerned, I think we have total clarity on this कि पाकिस्तान में दहशतगर्दी के खिलाफ जो जिद्दोजहद और एक्चुअल फिजिकल जंग भी लड़ी गई है, उसमें पाकिस्तान के शहरियों ने, सिपाहियों ने कोई 70 से 80 हज़ार तक कुर्बानियां अपनी जान की दी हैं, तो हमें वापस उस जगह नहीं जाना है. APS पब्लिक स्कूल आपने देखा, मीन दैट वाज अ वेरी सोबरिंग एंड यूनिफाइंग मोमेंट. और हमारी हुकूमत ने तो मैरियट बॉम्ब ब्लास्ट के बाद ही जॉइंट सेशन 4 दिन के लिए कर दिया था. We didn't used to call joint sessions to bulldoze bills. We used to call them to build consensus. And मुझे याद है कि मैंने 4 घंटे खड़े होके सवाल जवाब किए थे, जहाँ तक हमारी आगे की पॉलिसी होगी. फौज ने भी किया. वो क्लोज सेशंस होते थे, लेकिन उनमें कंसेंसस बिल्ड होती थी कि भाई आपने करना क्या है. कौम मुत्तहिद होके इन अंदरूनी और खित्ते में भी और ग्लोबल चैलेंजेस को किस तरह फेस करेगी. इसके लिए बहुत ज़रूरी होती है कि एक एका हो, सब एक साथ एक ज़बान से समझें एक दूसरे को. And policy making ji in critical times in war and peace is very necessary in democracies to use the power of parliament. Parliament एक बहुत ही unlike the presidential system बहुत ही एक useful tool होता है, और it's right there, it's available to create a consensus against such elements. और हमें करना चाहिए, क्योंकि जहाँ तक औरतों की बात है, मगर पूरे माशरे की बात है. देखिए, we cannot afford to go back to that whole decade of where we fought. और आप टीवी ऑन करते थे और बस आप बॉम्ब ब्लास्ट देखते थे. टीवी ऑन करते थे, 1 घंटे बाद कुछ और हो रहा होता था. एंड वी यूज्ड टू, तो जब अफगानिस्तान में जो भी सूरत हाल है, वो एक अलग मुल्क है. आपको पीपल्स पार्टी ने तो तब भी कहा, हमने तो CEC कॉल की और कहा कि वी आर वाचिंग द सिचुएशन, कि वो कितना इंक्लूसिव होगा, औरतों और अक़लियतों का वहाँ क्या मतलब हाल होगा, और किस तरह उनकी आवाज़ होगी नई डिस्पेंसेशन में. तो हम तो ये सूरत हाल देख रहे हैं. बाकियों देखिए, रियासत और मुल्क भी कुछ यही कह रहा है, लेकिन इस वक्त जैसे हमने कहा, नेशनल एक्शन प्लान पर आप उसको फिर से मुस्तहकम करें, उसका रिव्यू करें, उसके लिए एक नई शराकतदारी क्रिएट करें. ऑलरेडी है, लेकिन द कमिटीज ऑलरेडी एग्जिस्ट. एक नेशनल सिक्योरिटी कमेटी है पार्लियामेंट की, जो हमारे जॉइंट सेशन से उसने जन्म दिया. वी सेड के एक रेगुलर फोरम हो टू एड्रेस दीज चैलेंजेस. और सारे एक के बाद एक जो ज़रब अज़ब वगैरह वगैरह दूसरे हुए एक्शन, जो किनेटिक एक्शन हुआ दहशतगर्दी के खिलाफ, जो ज़रूरी भी होता है जब पाकिस्तान का झंडा चैलेंज होता है, वो हुए. और मगर उसके साथ एक आपके पास एक हार्ट्स एंड माइंड भी बैटल होता है. और मैं आखिरी बात ये कहूँगी कि मोहतरमा शहीद ने तो अपनी जान दी. आखिरी जलसे में उन्होंने यही चैलेंज किया था कि पाकिस्तान में सिर्फ पाकिस्तान का स्वात में झंडा निकाल दिया गया था, वो वापस आना है, एंड हम बचाएंगे और आप मिल के बचाएंगे. इसमें अगर हमारी जानें फिर खतरे से 2-4 हों, तो देन सो बी इट. So thank you very much, Haque Saab.
Thank you, ji. Last question, ji. Sarfraz Ali Saab.
Now 2:45. If you'll
Achha.
have to go, please.
Okay, fair enough. No problem. Thank you very much, Senator Saiba. It's always a pleasure to hear you. It's a great book. We enjoy it. Keep it coming. Keep good things coming. All the best. We look up to you. Thank you. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you. Very grateful.